Before we begin, take 1 second and make this moment useful. If you enjoy deep, long-form audiobooks that actually change the way you think, subscribe to Mental Core Audiobooks. And if something in this episode speaks to you, leave a comment. Even a simple listening or "I needed this" helps the channel grow and tells the algorithm this kind of content matters. Now let's begin. Today we're exploring a book that isn't trying to hype you up with empty positivity. This isn't the kind of self-help that tells you to just think happy thoughts and everything will magically become easy. This is about something far more real: the mechanics of inner peace, the structure of a quiet mind, and why most people live with constant mental noise without realizing how loud it has become. If I asked you right now what's bothering you most, chances are you'd point to something outside of you: your job, your relationship, your finances, your family, your health, the pressure of life. And those things matter. But here's the uncomfortable truth that this book forces you to face. The biggest source of your mental noise is not what happens around you. It's what you are trying to control that was never yours to control in the first place. Think about how many hours you've spent replaying conversations inside your head. Why did she say that? What did he mean by that? Why didn't I respond differently? Why did I let that happen? And then the heavier loops: if only I had taken that job. If only I had left earlier. If only I hadn't trusted that person. If only I could go back to that moment and rewrite the scene. Those thoughts don't just pass through your mind. They set up camp. They build a home. And eventually you can wake up on a quiet morning with no immediate problem in front of you and still feel like your mind is running a marathon. That is the tragedy of mental noise. Even in silence, you don't experience silence. You experience your own internal storm. This book names that storm clearly. It describes the mind's obsession with the uncontrollable. The mind tries to create safety by controlling variables, but it ends up creating suffering by resisting reality. Most people don't realize they're doing it because it feels like responsibility. It feels like being careful. It feels like being prepared. But often it is just fear wearing a professional suit. Imagine you are holding a rope. On the other end of the rope is everything you are trying to control: your partner's mood, your boss's opinion, the outcome of a project, the way your family sees you, the economy, traffic, other people's decisions, someone's reaction, someone's approval, someone's understanding. Now picture yourself pulling on that rope every day. You pull hard. You pull with tension. You pull with anxiety. You pull with the belief that if you pull enough, reality will move toward your expectations. But here's the brutal part. That rope isn't attached to anything solid. You are pulling against air, against variables you cannot hold. And the harder you pull, the more exhausted you become. This is one of the most important realizations a human being can have. Mental exhaustion often comes from struggling with things that have no handle. From childhood, we are trained to believe control equals success. Control your grades. Control your future. Control your image. Control how people treat you by behaving perfectly. Control your career by planning everything. Control your relationships by being good enough so nobody leaves. The world teaches you that if you manage everything correctly, you can guarantee a stable life. But reality isn't built that way. Reality is chaotic. People are unpredictable. Life has timing, randomness, accidents, and factors that don't care about your plans. You can be disciplined and still face loss. You can be kind and still be misunderstood. You can work hard and still be blocked. You can do your best and still not be chosen. When you finally accept that, something changes inside you. At first it feels terrifying because the ego wants certainty. The ego wants guarantees. The ego wants control. But the deeper part of you understands something else. Letting go of false control is not weakness. It is clarity, and clarity is power. A quiet mind begins when you stop treating everything as personal. One of the biggest reasons the mind is noisy is because we interpret external events as direct statements about our worth. Someone doesn't reply, and your mind turns it into rejection. Someone criticizes your work and your mind turns it into proof that you are not enough. Someone behaves coldly, and your mind turns it into a verdict on your value. But people are complex. Their behavior is often shaped by their own wounds, fears, stress, ego, and history. When you take everything personally, you carry what doesn't belong to you, and the mind becomes crowded. This is where the book introduces a harsh but liberating phrase, voluntary suffering. Not because pain is imaginary, pain is real. But much of what we call suffering is the mind choosing to relive, reframe, and replay what cannot be changed. We know the past is closed. We know it. But the mind doesn't care about logic when it is attached to regret. The mind time travels. It drags you back into old rooms and forces you to watch the same scene again. Except now it adds commentary. You should have known better. You ruined everything. You missed your chance. You're always like this. And the mind doesn't just replay memories. It rewrites your identity through them. It turns a mistake into a label. It turns a failure into a future. It turns a moment into a prison. A quiet mind isn't created by erasing the past. It is created by changing your relationship to the past. The memory may exist, but it doesn't have to rule you. So how do we begin? Not with forcing positivity, not with pretending nothing hurts. A quiet mind begins with one question that sounds simple, but most people cannot answer clearly. What is actually within my control, and what is not? Most people have been conditioned to believe everything is their responsibility. Someone insults you and you think it's your job to prove them wrong. Someone leaves you and you think it must be your fault. Something fails and you think you should have done more. Someone is toxic and you think you can fix them if you love them hard enough. But look closer. Someone insults you. Their words, their tone, their decision to be cruel, that was not in your control. It happened. It is done. But here is what is in your control. The story you attach to it. You can choose to connect their insult to your self-worth and spiral into shame, or you can see it as what it is, a reflection of their state, not a definition of your value. That gap between the event and your interpretation is where freedom begins. That gap is where your quiet mind is built. Letting go does not mean you accept abuse. Letting go does not mean you become passive. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. Letting go means you stop trying to control what does not respond to control, and you begin controlling what actually belongs to you. Your choices, your boundaries, your attention, and your response. This becomes extremely clear in relationships. Imagine you are in a relationship with someone emotionally unavailable. They are hot and cold. Present one day, distant the next. You adjust your behavior constantly. You communicate more carefully. You give space. You support. You hope. You sacrifice. You try to solve what they refuse to face. Now ask the question honestly. Can you control whether they heal their wounds? Can you control whether they choose to show up? Can you control whether they become consistent? No. The only control you have is whether you continue to accept what destroys your peace. This is where letting go becomes self-respect, not cruelty, not selfishness. Self-respect. You are not abandoning them. You are refusing to abandon yourself. A quiet mind cannot be built in a life where you constantly betray your own boundaries. Another huge area where people try to control the uncontrollable is other people's opinions. What will they think? What will they say? How will they judge me? These questions run entire lives. People shrink their dreams, edit their personality, silence their truth, and choose comfort over authenticity just to avoid disapproval. But disapproval is inevitable. Even the most generous person will be criticized by someone. Even the most disciplined person will be misunderstood. If you are going to be judged anyway, why live a life designed to satisfy someone else's expectations? Other people's opinions are not facts. They are interpretations shaped by their experiences, insecurities, and biases. When you understand that, criticism becomes information, not identity. Letting go doesn't mean you pretend it doesn't hurt. Pain is real. Disappointment is real. Anger is real. The point is not to deny emotion. The point is to stop letting emotion move in permanently. Emotions are meant to be visitors, not residents. When you hold on to uncontrollable things, your present suffers. You are physically here but mentally stuck in the past or lost in an imagined future. Someone is speaking to you, and you are not listening because you are rehearsing tomorrow's confrontation or replaying yesterday's argument. This is why so many people feel disconnected, not because they are alone, but because they are never fully present. A quiet mind is presence. And presence is power. The past is a memory. The future is a possibility. But now is where life happens. Now is where your choices exist. Now is where your power lives. And your power is not in controlling the world. Your power is in controlling your response to the world. Most people believe reactions are automatic. Someone triggers you and you explode. Someone challenges you and you defend. Someone criticizes you and you collapse. But reactions can be trained. They can be slowed down. They can be reshaped. The next time something triggers you, do one simple thing. Pause and breathe once. Just one breath. And inside that breath, ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years? Am I giving this moment more power than my peace? That pause, small as it seems, is the beginning of mental silence. Your ego will resist it. The ego wants to win. The ego wants the last word. The ego wants to prove, correct, punish, impress, dominate. But peace is often more valuable than being right. Silence is often more powerful than the last word. A quiet mind does not mean you become weak. It means you become wise. You stop fighting battles that do not build your life. In the next part, we will go deeper into the second major pillar of quietness: action over outcome. How anxiety is born from obsessing over the future, why what-if thinking becomes a prison, and how you can return to the present through one small action at a time. If you're still here, comment "quiet mind" so I know you're listening. And make sure you're subscribed, because part 2 is where the real shift begins. In part 1, we talked about control, about how much mental noise is created by trying to manage what was never meant to be managed. Now we need to go deeper, because understanding what to let go of is only the first step. The real question is this: why does your mind react so fast even when you know better? You've probably experienced this. You promise yourself you'll stay calm. You decide you won't let certain people affect you anymore. You tell yourself you'll respond with maturity. And then it happens. A comment, a look, a message, a tone of voice. And suddenly, your heart is racing, your chest tightens, and your thoughts are already forming a defense. This reaction feels automatic, instant, uncontrollable, but it isn't random. Your reactions are learned, conditioned, rehearsed over years. The human brain is designed to protect, not to make you peaceful. Long before modern life, the brain evolved to detect threats quickly. A sound in the dark, a sudden movement, an unfamiliar face. React first. Analyze later. That instinct kept humans alive. The problem is that your brain does not distinguish clearly between physical danger and emotional discomfort. To your nervous system, rejection feels like danger. Criticism feels like danger. Embarrassment feels like danger. Being ignored feels like danger. Losing status feels like danger. So your body reacts before your logic can intervene. This is why you may intellectually understand that someone's words don't define you, but emotionally feel attacked anyway. The reaction happens at a deeper level than conscious thought. This book explains something crucial. Emotional reactions are not proof that something is wrong with you. They are signals, and signals can be decoded. Every strong reaction points to an internal trigger, a wound, a belief, a fear, a story you've been carrying. For example, two people can receive the same criticism. One shrugs it off, the other feels crushed. The difference is not the criticism. The difference is what it touches inside. If criticism activates a belief like, "I'm not good enough," the reaction will be intense. If it touches a fear like, "I'll be abandoned if I fail," the reaction will be explosive. If it connects to a story like "I must always prove my value," the reaction will be defensive. Your reactions are not about the present moment. They are echoes of the past. This is where ego enters the picture. The ego is not arrogance. It is identity protection. The ego is the image you have of yourself and the image you want others to see. When that image feels threatened, the ego reacts. Someone questions your competence. The ego reacts. Someone ignores your effort. The ego reacts. Someone disagrees with you publicly. The ego reacts. The ego's job is not to tell the truth. Its job is to defend the identity. That's why reactions often feel urgent, emotional, justified. The ego believes that if it does not respond immediately, something will be lost. Respect, control, power, validation. But here's the paradox. The more you react, the more power you give away. People who know how to provoke reactions understand this very well. They don't need to control you physically. They only need to control your emotional buttons. Once they know what triggers you, they can predict your behavior. This is why the book emphasizes emotional self-awareness as a form of strength. If someone can make you angry on command, they are leading you. If someone can disturb your peace with a sentence, they are holding the steering wheel. If someone can dictate your mood, they are influencing your life more than you think. A quiet mind is not passive, it is strategic. To build it, you must identify your triggers without judgment. Ask yourself honestly, what situations make me overreact? What words hit harder than they should? What behaviors instantly change my mood? What patterns keep repeating? Maybe it's being ignored. Maybe it's feeling disrespected. Maybe it's being compared. Maybe it's not being appreciated. Maybe it's losing control. Maybe it's being misunderstood. Once you identify the trigger, ask the deeper question. What belief is underneath this reaction? For example, if they ignore me, it means I'm not important. If they criticize me, it means I'm failing. If I'm not in control, something bad will happen. If they leave, it proves I'm not enough. These beliefs operate silently. You don't consciously repeat them, but your reactions reveal them. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. That's impossible. The goal is to create space between stimulus and response. That space is where mastery lives. When something triggers you, the first skill is awareness. Not suppression, not denial. Awareness. I'm feeling activated. My body is reacting. This is familiar. Naming the reaction already weakens it. Then comes the second skill. Delay. You don't need to respond immediately. Most emotional damage happens in urgency. Texts sent too fast. Words spoken too sharp. Decisions made too early. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is processing. When you delay, you regain authorship over your response. The third skill is choice. Ask yourself, what response protects my peace instead of my ego? What response aligns with the person I want to become? What response ends the cycle instead of feeding it? Sometimes the strongest response is no response. Sometimes it's a calm boundary. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's a clear sentence without explanation. The ego wants drama. The quiet mind wants resolution. This book makes an important distinction. Reacting feels powerful in the moment, but responding is powerful in the long term. Reactions burn energy. Responses conserve it. Another reason reactions feel uncontrollable is because many people live in constant overstimulation. Notifications, news, opinions, comparisons, arguments, noise. The mind never rests. When the mind is overloaded, it becomes reactive. You cannot expect emotional control from a system that is never allowed to slow down. That's why building a quiet mind is not only about thinking differently, but about living differently. Fewer inputs, clear boundaries, intentional silence, time alone without distraction. Stillness is not emptiness. It is recalibration. When you give your mind space, you start noticing patterns instead of drowning in them. You see what triggers you before it takes over. You feel the wave rising instead of being pulled under. And with practice, something changes. The same triggers appear, but the reaction weakens. The pause becomes natural. The urge to prove fades. The need to defend dissolves. You stop reacting not because you don't care, but because you care about something more important: your inner stability. In Part 3, we will explore how positive psychology fits into this process, not as fake optimism, but as mental training, how focus shapes emotional reality, how attention becomes direction, and how small cognitive shifts create long-term peace. If you're still listening, write in the comments, "I choose control." Up to this point, we've talked about control, reactions, ego, and emotional triggers. Now we move into something more subtle, but equally powerful. Focus. Not motivation, not optimism, not pretending everything is fine. Focus. Because where your attention goes, your emotional reality follows. Most people believe their emotions come from what happens to them, but positive psychology, when properly understood, shows something different. Emotions are not reactions to events alone. They are reactions to interpretations, and interpretations are guided by attention. Two people can live the same day and experience completely different emotional worlds. One feels overwhelmed, the other feels grounded. One feels defeated, the other feels calm. The difference is not the day. The difference is what they focused on. Your mind is constantly scanning reality, but it cannot process everything. So it filters, it selects, it highlights, and that selection becomes your experience. If your attention is trained to notice threat, lack, and comparison, your emotional baseline will be anxiety. If your attention is trained to notice progress, meaning, and agency, your emotional baseline will be stability. This is not positive thinking. This is attentional training. The book explains that your brain is like a spotlight in a dark room. Whatever you shine it on becomes vivid. Everything else fades. The room hasn't changed. Only the light has moved. Most people never learn to move the light intentionally. They let it be hijacked by noise, news, social media, other people's opinions, old memories, imagined futures. As a result, their minds are always elsewhere, rarely here. Positive psychology does not ask you to deny pain. It asks you to balance perception. If your mind constantly replays what went wrong, you reinforce helplessness. If your mind constantly compares, you reinforce inadequacy. If your mind constantly anticipates disaster, you reinforce fear. But when you intentionally guide attention, you reshape emotional patterns over time. One of the core practices discussed in the book is selective awareness. This means consciously choosing what deserves your mental energy. Not everything does. Your brain will try to convince you that every thought is important, every emotion urgent, every problem immediate. That's not true. Most thoughts are noise. Most worries are rehearsals for events that never happen. A quiet mind is not one that has no thoughts. It is one that does not follow every thought. This is where gratitude is often misunderstood. Gratitude is not about forcing happiness. It is about training attention. When you deliberately notice what is stable, what is working, what is sufficient, you are teaching your brain that safety exists in the present moment. That calms the nervous system. You are not saying nothing is wrong. You are saying not everything is wrong. That distinction matters. Another powerful concept here is psychological ownership. You are responsible for your actions, your choices, and your inner world. You are not responsible for controlling outcomes, managing other people's emotions, or predicting the future. When you focus on what you can influence, your mind settles. When you focus on what you cannot, your mind spirals. This is why clarity feels calming. Confusion fuels anxiety. One practical exercise from the book is the daily focus check. At any moment of stress, ask yourself, what am I focusing on right now? Is it something I can influence? Is this focus helping or draining me? If it's draining and uncontrollable, redirect. Redirecting focus is not suppression. It's leadership. Just like a muscle, attention strengthens with use. The more you practice choosing where your mind goes, the less reactive it becomes. Another key idea in this section is meaning over intensity. Many people chase intense emotions, high motivation, extreme passion, constant stimulation, but intensity is unstable. It burns fast and leaves exhaustion behind. Meaning, on the other hand, is steady. When your actions are aligned with meaning instead of emotional highs, your mind becomes quieter. You stop chasing feelings and start building consistency. This is why routines calm the mind, not because they're boring, but because they reduce decision fatigue. They remove unnecessary chaos. The book highlights that peace is often the result of structure, not freedom without limits. Simple routines, clear priorities, intentional rest, defined boundaries. These create mental safety. Your mind relaxes when it knows what to expect. Another major contributor to mental noise is unfinished attention, open loops, conversations not processed, emotions not acknowledged, thoughts not examined. When you ignore emotional signals, they don't disappear. They linger in the background, demanding attention through anxiety. Positive psychology encourages emotional acknowledgement without dramatization. I feel anxious. I feel disappointed. I feel frustrated. No judgment, no story, just recognition. Emotions lose power when they are named calmly. What fuels them is resistance. The more you fight a feeling, the louder it becomes. The more you allow it to exist without feeding it, the faster it passes. This is emotional maturity. The book also emphasizes the importance of self-directed narrative. You are constantly telling yourself a story about who you are and what your life means. If that story is rigid and negative, your mind stays tense. I'm always behind. I never get it right. I have to prove myself. I'm not enough. These stories feel factual, but they are interpretations repeated so often they feel permanent. Positive psychology invites flexibility and identity. You are not your past. You are not your worst moment. You are not your fear. You are a process. When you adopt a growth-based narrative, mistakes stop feeling like threats. They become data, feedback, information. This reduces emotional intensity dramatically. A quiet mind is not fragile. It is adaptable. One final concept in this section is energy hygiene. Just as you protect your physical health, you must protect your mental environment. What you consume matters. Who you listen to matters. What conversations you engage in matters. Constant exposure to outrage, negativity, and comparison trains your nervous system to stay activated. Peace is not found by accident. It is protected by design. Choosing silence, choosing depth over noise, choosing fewer inputs with higher quality. This is not isolation. This is discernment. By the end of this part, one thing should be clear. Your mind becomes quieter, not when life becomes easier, but when your relationship with attention changes. You don't need to control everything. You don't need to fix everyone. You don't need to react to every thought. You need to choose where your focus lives. In part 4, we will bring everything together. Letting go, focus, emotional awareness, and self-relationship. We will talk about integration, about becoming your own inner anchor, and about how a quiet mind is built daily, not discovered once. If you're still here, write in the comments. I choose clarity. Everything we've explored so far leads to this final realization. A quiet mind is not something you find. It is something you become, not through force, not through perfection, but through daily alignment. Up until now, we've talked about letting go of control, understanding emotional reactions, training focus, and reshaping attention. But none of these work in isolation. A quiet mind is the result of integration. When your thoughts, emotions, actions, and values begin to move in the same direction, internal conflict dissolves. And when conflict dissolves, noise fades. Most mental suffering is not caused by pain itself. It is caused by resistance, by fighting reality, by arguing with what is, by demanding certainty where none exists. Positive psychology does not promise a life without discomfort. It teaches you how to stand steady inside it. This is where the idea of becoming your own inner anchor becomes essential. An anchor doesn't stop storms. It prevents drift. Life will still be unpredictable. People will still disappoint you. Plans will still fail sometimes. Emotions will still rise. But when you become internally anchored, you are no longer carried away by every wave. You remain centered. The book emphasizes that inner stability comes from one core practice: self-trust, not confidence in outcomes, not belief that everything will work out perfectly, but trust in your ability to respond wisely, regardless of what happens. When you trust yourself, uncertainty loses its power. Most anxiety is not fear of events. It is fear of your own reactions. What if I can't handle it? What if I fall apart? What if I break? But when you know you can meet difficulty with awareness, self-respect, and emotional regulation, fear softens. You stop bracing against life and start moving with it. Another crucial element in this final integration is values-based living. When your decisions are driven by fear, approval, or comparison, your mind stays restless. You are constantly checking external signals to decide if you're safe, accepted, or successful. But when your decisions are driven by values, clarity emerges. Values are internal. They don't fluctuate with opinion. They don't depend on mood. When you know what matters to you, decision-making becomes simpler. You may still feel discomfort, but you don't feel confusion. Confusion is far more exhausting than effort. The book encourages defining a small set of core values, not vague ideas, but lived principles. Things like integrity, growth, calm, honesty, presence, compassion. When faced with stress, instead of asking, "What should I do?" you ask, "What aligns with who I choose to be?" That question quiets the mind immediately. Another powerful integration point is acceptance without resignation. Acceptance does not mean liking what is happening. It means acknowledging reality as it is before responding. Resistance creates friction. Acceptance creates movement. When you accept reality, you conserve energy. That energy can then be used for action instead of mental struggle. This is where emotional resilience is built. Resilience is not toughness. It is flexibility. The book explains that resilient people do not avoid pain. They move through it without turning it into identity. They feel sadness without becoming a sad person. They feel fear without becoming a fearful person. They feel uncertainty without becoming lost. They understand emotions are states, not definitions. This perspective alone quiets the mind dramatically. Another essential practice in this final section is intentional closure. Your mind hates unfinished loops, unspoken feelings, unresolved meaning, lingering narratives. This is why reflection matters. Not rumination, reflection, taking time to process experiences. What did this teach me? What am I carrying that no longer serves me? What can I release? Closure does not always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from permission to move forward without them. A quiet mind knows when to stop searching. The book also highlights the importance of self-compassion as discipline, not indulgence. Being kind to yourself does not mean lowering standards. It means holding standards without self-destruction. You correct without shaming. You adjust without condemning. You grow without cruelty. This changes everything. When self-talk becomes supportive instead of hostile, your nervous system relaxes. Growth becomes sustainable. Motivation becomes internal. You stop needing external pressure to move forward. Finally, the book arrives at a simple but profound truth. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of alignment. When your mind, body, and values are aligned, silence appears naturally. Not empty silence, grounded silence. The kind where thoughts still come, but they don't overwhelm. The kind where emotions still rise, but they don't control. The kind where life still challenges you, but you remain steady. This is the art of a quiet mind. Not retreating from life, not numbing yourself, not pretending everything is fine, but meeting life fully, calmly, and consciously. If you've stayed until the end of this journey, take a moment and reflect on this. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to stop fighting yourself. The quiet mind you're looking for is not somewhere in the future. It is built in the choices you make today, in the pauses you allow, in the thoughts you don't chase, in the values you honor. This is not a destination. It is a practice. And every time you choose clarity over chaos, presence over panic, compassion over criticism, you are already living it. If this message resonated with you, write in the comments, "I choose a quiet mind." And remember to subscribe. More deep dives like this are coming. This journey doesn't end here. It begins here.